Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Saliba, and on behalf of Freeport Speech, I welcome you to our first event of the 2025 season. We realize that you've come here tonight to hear our two speakers. So if you have not read the program, please take it home with you, as it has much useful information that we're not going to repeat right now. Anyone who has followed presidential politics during the last 30 years knows a lot about Calvin Mackenzie and Amy Walter. Each has been the go-to source for major networks, newspapers, and news bureaus for accurate, factual, and reliable information. Instead of repeating what most of you already know about Cal and Amy, let me instead tell you something you might not know. Cal is an amazing photographer who purchased his first camera from an Army PX in Bien Ho, Vietnam in 1970. Since that time, he has recorded over 200,000 images during his world travels. To quote Cal, making a picture is a little bit of art, a little bit of science, but mostly magnification of a memory. It's a way to embrace and enlarge an experience. Although probably busier than any of us in this room, Amy Walter is never too busy to be kind to her friends. She is just plain nice. She's normal. A summa cum laude graduate of Colby, she loves cycling, her family, and her pet dog. She has empathy for all. To quote Amy, our terrier, Eli, is absolutely a member of our family. We got him when Caleb, her son, was in kindergarten, which has been great for teaching empathy. Did you know that dogs don't like it when you hug them? For them, that's super aggressive. You might like it, but it's really uncomfortable for your dog. You have to rethink what you need versus what the other creature needs. So don't hug your dog. And other life lessons from Amy Walter. When you hear Amy, you'll know that we're really not talking about the dog. Being a proud nunca cum laude graduate of Colby College myself, it is my honor to introduce to you two of the nicest, kindest, normal people anywhere. Professor Emeritus Cal Mackenzie and his former favorite student, Amy Walter.
I think this is right? Okay. I can't remember.
Are we on? Can you hear us?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, good.
Great.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for that. Let me say to start what a treat it is for me to be sitting here with Amy Walter. Amy and I first met more than 35 years ago when she showed up in one of my courses at Colby. And I've heard her say since then that I gave her a bad grade in a paper.
It's the worst grade.
Which was probably an A- because she graduated summa cum laude. But it's one of the great thrills for a teacher is to watch your students grow into what you know they can be. And to have had that opportunity with Amy for so many years has been a great pleasure for me. So we're going to chat a little bit about what we've been seeing in Washington and what we make of that, and then we're going to throw the floor open to questions, and we hope you'll have a lot, and we look forward to answering those. So Amy, here we are 5 weeks into Trump 2.0. What are we learning?
Well, what are we learning? Well, first, thank you for the invitation to be here, to see old friends, and of course, I will do anything for Cal Mackenzie, you did officially give me a really bad grade, and I deserved it, and that is why I have respected you so much, because you expected so much, and I learned so much from you. And I can't thank you enough for what you've given back to me, but there's so many people like me who are now doing amazing things. Thanks to you and the work you put in. So it's been 5 weeks, which is hard to believe. It feels like it's been 27 years that we've already been covering this. The thing that's interesting, in Washington, people keep talking about it as this is shock and awe campaign. It's not really shocking to most Americans. This is exactly what they expected. And in fact, when you look at the polling that's come out since he is officially started his second term, 75% of voters are saying, yeah, this is what we expected, what he's doing. So that, I think there are a lot of people in Washington who were not expecting, especially those who work in the federal workforce, that they were getting laid off. But in terms of his behavior and his priorities, this is what voters they are not particularly surprised by it. What I think has been interesting, though, to watch over the course of these last 5 weeks is where his approval ratings have gone. Now, he started this tenure with higher approval ratings than he'd ever had, which for Donald Trump still ranks him as the lowest of presidents coming in to the first few days in the White House. He is the most polarizing person to ever be elected in both the first, even in 2017, and now in 2025. So he's never really gotten an actual honeymoon. But this time around, he got like a long weekend in Niagara Falls at like a Holiday Inn Express, you know? So started off with over 50%, which he'd never ever hit 50% approval rating in his entire tenure as president. And now, 5.5 weeks later, his job approval rating is about 8 points lower on average, and he's teetering right on the above water, underwater approval rating. So he's above water by a little less than a point in terms of people feeling positively about him. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do, but that is which he believes is his mandate, and it is his mandate to about 45% of the electorate. And they like it, and they want to see more of it, but that's not what the mandate was for everybody who voted for him. I would argue his biggest mandate going in was pretty simple. Get the economy back on track, deal with this inflation. And some people liked the other stuff. Some people didn't like the other stuff, but that was the fundamental question. And so the fact that we're 5.5 weeks in and he's fulfilling all the promises to his base, keeps his base very engaged and very happy. But it also reminds the people who never really liked him what they don't like about him. Like what we've noticed over the course of Donald Trump's time as candidate and as president, the more he's in the public eye, the higher his disapproval ratings go, right? Most people, most candidates are like, if only I could talk to voters more, they would like me more. When he goes out, it's this really incredible phenomenon. He does best when nobody knows he's there, right? When part of the reason I think his approval ratings were so good going into January was he was kind of out of the picture, right? He was playing golf. He wasn't talking very much. He wasn't in front of the cameras. There are a certain percent of the electorate who are like out of sight, out of mind with him, right? Yeah. They don't really think about him. They don't really think about politics. When they see him and they remind him, that's what I don't really like. The other thing that has been noticeable, besides his approval ratings going down, is that you're seeing worries about the economy continue to tick up. And his approval ratings on the economy also ticking down. Now look, it's only been a month. I don't think anybody expected that in 1 month, prices were suddenly going to go back to 2020 levels. I think, though, that there's a concern among a lot of the folks who said, I wanted to see him there to bring costs down, that he's not really talking about costs.
Yeah.
He's talking a lot about Elon Musk, and he's talking a lot about Zelensky and tariffs, but he's not really talking about the kitchen table issues. And I think that is something that I'm going to be really curious to watch as we go forward.
You know, when you've been studying the presidency for half a century and a new president comes along, you look for some analogs.
Yeah.
Who in the past was like this? Well, I think the simple answer here is no one. But we can find little pieces. If you go back to the beginning of the New Deal in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt elected with 57% of the popular vote, with a Congress that was overwhelmingly Democratic in both houses. That was a mandate.
Yeah.
And it was very clear that it was a mandate to do something to get us out of the Depression. And so in the early days of that administration, we had frenetic energy, not unlike what we had now. We had new government agencies created, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FCC. There was no executive office of the president in 1933. That came in 1937. So he didn't have the kind of staff around him that exists now. And there was nothing like Project 2025 to lay out a blueprint for this administration. In many ways, this is the most prepared administration for the early part of taking office as we've ever had. They're really following the blueprint. You know, if you've read Project 2025, there's no surprises happening here. And we can see a little bit of Nixon in this, the massive impoundment of funds, the elimination of USAID, a $45 billion agency. That's an impoundment. The Congress had appropriated that money, and the president said, I'm not going to spend it. We have a law on the books called the Impoundment Control Act, which was passed to respond to Richard Nixon in 1974, that says you can't do that. You got to spend the money, or you got to go back to Congress and ask for permission to rescind those expenditures. And we did have an enemies list in Nixon's time, so that's not unique here. And we did have a vice president, Spiro Agnew, who was constantly attacking the press. Those of you who are old enough will remember the nattering nabobs of negativism that Agnew talked about in
That was
those
the fake
days.
media.
Yeah, so there's some of that. And then in the Clinton administration, we did have a major effort to reorganize the government, to save money and to reduce the size of the federal government. It was called Reinventing Government, and it was Al Gore's project. You remember him hammering ashtrays with his hammer? But it was very different from what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
It was a much more thoughtful effort. It did eventually save $150 billion and reduce the federal workforce by 400,000 people. And if your memory takes you back that far, you may remember at the end of the Clinton administration, we had a budget surplus.
Yeah.
I remember going to class one day and saying, you know, we're going to have a budget surplus this year? And thinking to myself, wait a minute, did I say that? Is that possible that I said that?
Yeah.
But we did. And that was a process driven largely by public employees who were given incentives to think about ways to be more efficient about what they did and to lead the charge in doing that. Public employees were not the enemy, they were the good guys in those days. So that doesn't fit either. So we struggle to find analogs for what's going on now. And when you can't find an analog, it's a little hard to predict where the outcome is going to be on all of this, which is why we're here talking about all of this.
Well, and look, we're also at a time where what we're seeing around the world is not, I mean, we can't make an exact cause and effect in every country similarly, but this idea of disruption, the forces of outsiders coming in and questioning traditions and norms and institutions has been happening everywhere. And people around the world in democratic countries are saying, yeah, we like this idea of somebody coming in and disrupting the system that's been put in place. In many cases, it's, really since World War II, that need to be reassessed. Except there's a difference between reassessment and outright annihilation.
Totally.
And that's, I do think the challenge we have going forward is that you have a considerable percentage of Americans, and this was we saw this especially in 2024, who believe that the system has either been rigged against them or just simply has never been there for them. So the challenge that Democrats had in 2024, and I think continue today, is that they are now the party of the establishment. They are the party of norms. They are the elites. And Kamala Harris ran an entire campaign, so did, before he dropped out, Joe Biden, on the idea that voters were going to value institutions and norms over this disruptive force who was going to be unpredictable. And, it's one thing to say we need to shake things up. It's another to have bull in the china shop, and you never know what's going to get messed up along the way. And while it was decisive, it wasn't an overwhelming victory, but it still was decisive enough that the Trump administration and Republicans believe that they do have the go-ahead to make this kind of disruption because of, that the message that was sent during 2024, and quite frankly, that's been being sent all over the world.
And the president, the current president, has told us that he had a big mandate to do this, even though he got less than 50% of the popular vote, barely controls both houses of Congress. The Republicans gained 3 seats in the Senate in this election, but if you add up all the Senate votes that were cast in 2024, the Democrats got about 1.5 million more votes than the Republicans did. So this wasn't the American people crying for some big change, but as long as you tell the American people you've got a mandate and you act on that, and you have an echo chamber in the media to back you up on that, you can push forward. And in some ways, I think you could credit what's happened here with a kind of tactical brilliance, flooding the zone, moving quickly, knowing where you're going, overwhelming the responsible mechanisms in the system. That's what we've seen. And as Amy said, the Biden administration was one of the most stable administrations in American politics. There are 15, what we normally call the cabinet is 15 seats. And in the 4 years of the Biden administration, 16 people served in those 15 seats. The only cabinet officer who did not serve out the whole term was Marty Walsh, the first Secretary of Labor. In Trump's first administration, there were 45 people serving in those 15 seats. And hold on to your hat to see what comes next. But I think your point, Amy, is that people were a little tired of nothing seeming to happen here.
It wasn't just that nothing was seeming to happen. I mean, this is not something that just started with Donald Trump, right? This frustration with norms and institutions and the system has been building and building and building over the years. So that's not a surprise. I think you combine that with the fact that Joe Biden literally was invisible for more than a year. And it's one thing to say, okay, yes, we're following the norms and procedures, and maybe we're not moving as quickly as you'd like to change things, but we're definitely going to do these things. What Donald Trump is also doing is really a reaction to what Biden never did, which is to get out in front of the public, to make his case over and over and over again. And what was the statistic the other day about the number of questions that Trump has taken from the press in his first whatever number of days now we're in, is more than Biden took in months.
Absolutely.
So the the reaction to Biden and the frustration, I think, with voters about how that came to be, right? How did it come to be that this guy, he has this bad debate, he kind of disappears for a while, Kamala Harris comes in, there's not really a process, this seems this doesn't smell right to me. All of those things then also kind of fed into the Trump message, which is, that's right, you can't trust any of this.
So the obligations of being a president are, first of all, to try to do valuable things for the American people, but also to explain to the American people what you're doing and why it's good for them. And I think, at least in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, they did accomplish some of that first part. But Biden was never good at explaining what he was doing. He was totally deficient on charisma by the end of this administration. It was just difficult to even hear him give a set speech. And I think Trump offered something quite different to the American people, a kind of vigor. There's a lot of talk in the press these days about masculinity, and he was offering a kind of masculinity. Well, you can make of that whatever you want, but I think some voters took it that way, and that was helpful to him. And I think that played pretty well with voters at the poorer end of the financial spectrum as well. And that's what's building support for the Republicans right now. So we'll see where that goes. So, Amy, are the guardrails all down?
Well, here's the way I look at this. So, some of the guardrails at the legislative level, right? You would say, you've got Republicans now in charge of everything. So the Democrats don't have any power. And I know there's been a tremendous amount of frustration. I've seen these clips from town halls where Democrats are going in front of their constituents and explaining what's going on in Washington, and they're getting all this pushback from their constituents about, why aren't you doing more? You should be doing more. The thing about being in the minority, especially in the minority in the House, you literally have zero you can do, zero. Now the Senate has the filibuster, and so the Senate is where things you can put the brakes on, but in the House, there is nothing a House Democrat can do right now. They can message, they can protest, they can have debates with their colleagues, but they can't physically do anything. To me, the most telling statistic about the legislative guardrails on the Republican side, right? Who's going to be there in the Republican Party to stand up and say, don't like this. No, we shouldn't be doing this. Donald Trump came on the scene in 2016, which I don't think of as that long ago. 68% of the House Republicans have been elected since 2016. There's no pre-Trump party left.
Right. No.
And so when we talk about what Congress looks like or how they interacted with previous administrations, you might as well be talking to people from 100 years ago, right? Because they have that's not a reference point for that. Trump is all that they've known and all that they understand. And the power that he wields, I don't know, you tell me historically, I don't know of a president who is as powerful in his control of his party and the legislative elections and their fortunes like Donald Trump is.
Well, it's become like a parliamentary
It
party,
is like a
right?
parliament.
Okay,
If you get the Trump endorsement,
do what the leadership tells you.
Yep.
In this case, the leadership is named Donald Trump. And if you don't, you lose your committee chairmanship, or you get primaried. Somebody runs against you in the primary, and Elon Musk gives him a lot of money to make sure he wins. And that's Richard Nixon used to say, I don't often quote Richard Nixon in a podcast. He used to say, no politician wants to commit political suicide. And if taking a stand on something is going to encourage somebody to run against you in the primary, and the way we have gerrymandered our congressional elections now in the House, the primary is really, in most districts, the only race that matters. So if somebody runs against you and beats you there, your career is over. Then we also have this other element we're starting to hear a lot about, and that is physical intimidation of members of Congress.
Yes.
It was very interesting to watch Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa on Pete Hegseth's nomination to be Secretary of Defense. She is a veteran. She was a victim of sexual assault. She has worked very hard in her time in the Senate to prevent people from being victims, women from being victims of sexual assault. And here she gets a candidate who has a history of this, who was charged with it. And when he's first announced, she said, oh, I don't know about this. She came around. Well, people in her district, in her state, were all over her about this. She was getting death threats about it. You know, this is a real worrisome thing.
Yeah.
But that's the political universe we live in right now. And so to get somebody to stand up against the leadership of their own party is, as you said, extremely, extremely difficult right now.
And then we have the next set of guardrails, which would be other members of the executive branch,
Yep.
which, and we saw it in the first term, Trump, right? We'd hear those stories of cabinet members or members of the executive staff who would take things off of Trump's desk, right? Magically find other pieces of paper for him to sign, right? So working very hard to try to move him in certain directions. Those people are all gone, obviously. And as you said, both Trump and the people he brought in are much better prepared for what it means to be president and what the executive office can do. So those folks are gone. People around, so there's no one in his immediate circle who would do that, or even in the wider circle. Now the federal workforce has been gutted, so that in their place will be Trump appointees.
Right.
So those guardrails aren't there. So that leaves you then with the courts, which have been sort of a mixed bag. Obviously, we'll see which ones make it up to the Supreme Court. And, you know, that is where we will see two things. One, just where the line is drawn on the Supreme Court about the executive power. Right. And as you have written a lot about, this debate over executive power isn't new.
No.
Every president tries to push the boundaries. They want more of it, and especially now that Congress is so dysfunctional and so broken, there's almost no way to get meaningful legislation passed in this era. That a president now feels like, if I'm going to do anything, I got to get it done myself, because they only have 4 years to do anything.
Well, we have a Congress that doesn't really legislate much anyway. The last Congress, the 118th Congress, we're in the 119th now, passed 274 public laws. Now remember, public laws include a lot of naming courthouses after dead congressmen and stuff like that. 274. In 1948, when Harry Truman was running for re-election, he ran against what he called the Do-Nothing 80th Congress. The Do-Nothing 80th Congress passed 906 public laws. This last Congress was one of the least productive in all of American history. And there is no reason to suspect that the 119th is going to be any different.
Yep.
And so to affect public policy in a significant way by relying on legislation is even when your party controls both houses, but by very, very narrow margins, it's very, very difficult to do that. So what do? You go to your executive power. For decades, there's been this theory kicking around, mostly in Republican administrations, called the unitary executive theory. And it basically is an argument that you can read the Article 2 of the Constitution very literally as empowering the president to do anything that's not legislative, including controlling who's sitting on all of the independent regulatory commissions, the Federal Reserve, and things like that. And if you don't like those people, you can just fire them, even though they have terms of office. The Bush administration, Dick Cheney was quite a fan of this, and the Bush administration played around with it and had attorneys in the Justice Department researching it to see what they can do, but it never really unfolded in the Bush administration. It's unfolding now.
Yeah.
And we will find out whether the courts are guardrails about all of this, because they will be the arbiters of whether this happens. And if they say this theory doesn't match what we think ought to be the case here, then of course it's up to the president to decide whether he's going to follow the court.
That's right.
on all
And
this.
that's when we
Yeah.
really find
Yeah,
where the
that's
guardrails sit.
What about the state governments? Are they a guardrail?
Well, I should ask this room, because it seems like a certain governor has decided that that she wants to do that.
Is she here? Is the governor of Maine here tonight?
Does anybody
No.
know who that is? Right? I'll see you in court.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
So there's that. We know, and I saw this graphic recently of I can't remember how far back it went, but presidents being sued by states' attorneys general, and the number of suits brought.
Yes, right.
And, for most years it was like, deep, 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 handful here and there. And then Trump,
Yeah.
Biden, and now I'm sure this Trump
Yeah.
will be, it's unprecedented.
Oh, of course.
That now the states they band together, right? Blue states are going to band together on abortion, access, on whatever, a whole host of
Yeah.
issues, I'm sure on environmental issues. We know that Republicans banded together when Biden was in office on immigration, but it is, so many of these fights now are being brought from outside of Washington.
Yeah.
And the states themselves, and it's actually not just the states themselves, it's within the states. Blue areas of the states not abiding by federal law or state law that doesn't agree with the views of the majority of the people in that place.
Yeah.
So we're already seeing, certain cities saying, well, we're going to stay a sanctuary city. We don't care what Donald Trump says. And you can't make us. And the governor can't make us. And so this is, so the disruption that we talked about is making its way all the way through, probably down it to the county
Right, right.
precinct level.
And, and past presidents who were successful would sometimes push their power to the maximum that they could. But most of the time when presidents were successful, they did it by negotiation and seeking consent. The images we see every day now, Tom Homan, the immigration czar, saying, I'm coming to Boston and I'm bringing hell with me. Or, don't get in our way or we'll knock you down. That's a new kind of lingo in American politics.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it works, but
It's the permanent. In one way, it's a permanent campaign, but it's the permanent divide that is meant to be promoted here, right? Which is you have to pick a side. You're on my side or you're on the bad guy side, and there's no in between.
Right.
And this is how, again, the Trump era started in 2017. It's going to continue through this. There is, we're the good team, you're the bad team, and the bad team is anybody who doesn't agree is the bad team. And in many cases, they're obvious targets if you're a blue area, if you're a liberal politician, but it can be anybody that's been critical in any way, shape, or form. And so it is a really distressing time because the winners of this believe that then they are in the right.
Yeah.
In other words, if it's your term, normally how politics, at least when I was being taught about it, was, what makes the American system work so well is that the winners know at some point they're going to be losers.
Yep.
And the losers want to be know that they're going to be winners. And so everybody wants to be treated well, knowing that they're going to be on the other side of that.
Right.
No, now it's just you want to do as much as you can to make sure that you are the winner. And so what we see now, it's I've been calling even the legislative process is sort of like smash and grab, which is if you get in, which in the modern era now, presidents are coming in with a House and a Senate. They have it they know the expiration date is probably the midterms. And so what can we do in our first 2 years? What can we get done? What are the priorities of the blue team or the red team? We're gonna shove that through this reconciliation process. It's gonna backfire because a good 50% of the public isn't gonna like it.
Yeah.
Our team's gonna like it. And so what if we lose because we got, we went in and we grabbed everything we got, and we'll come back and we'll do it again. They'll do their smash and grab and then we'll do ours, as opposed to this idea that we're all gonna go in and say, maybe we can fix the thing that Americans say is not working for them.
Right. I want to ask you about the midterm elections, but one more guardrail.
What?
The American
What did I forget?
public.
Oh, yes. Yes, which is important. And they get to vote. Well, one of those is in the midterms. So that leads directly into the 2026 question. Now, what I also think will be fascinating is to see, and as I said, the president's approval ratings are dropping, but they're going back to where they were for most of his presidency. And as I said, he's still more popular today than he was at this point in 2017. So there's no pushback, public pushback, and there will never be, maybe I should never say never, but this idea that he's gonna collapse, his support will collapse. That's just not gonna happen. His floor is so solid that getting below 42% is almost impossible. But his ceiling is also pretty capped. But he stays right in that spot. So even public sentiment, it's one thing if, oh my gosh, 28%, only 28% of people in this country approve of what I'm doing. It's another when it's fluctuating between 42 and 49%, right? But where the other guardrail should be the media. I don't know what the media is anymore.
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
No.
Media is being hollowed out. See all of the news organizations, the Washington Post. They're not, and if this election were held, the 2024 election, if only people who watched cable news, sort of traditional linear news on your TV or device, or read newspapers as their primary source of political information, Kamala Harris would have easily won.
Yep.
So what we think of as, it's the fourth estate, and they're going to hold politicians to account and the powerful to account, though that is also gone.
Well, in an environment of low information voters,
Yeah.
which is a large portion
Yes.
of the American public, how do you make the case against someone? We had a wonderful man was doing some painting at our house during the election, and I noticed he had a Trump sticker on his notebook, and I said, I guess you're going to vote for Donald Trump, right? And he said, yeah, I guess I will. And I said, well, do you mind if I ask why? And he said, well, the economy was a lot better when he was in, and I'm for that. And I said, don't want to have a conversation with a professor. So I said, well, how do you know it was better? He said, because Trump said so. What more do you need to know? And what Amy said has been proven over and over again. If higher information voters, people who read newspapers, people who watch cable news, are much more likely to vote Democratic. And people who don't do those things and who don't follow the news are much more likely to vote Republican. And as that second group expands, it really narrows the opportunities that people have to challenge what Donald Trump is doing right now. All right, so what are we going to see in 2026?
Yeah.
I'm hoping to be around for that, Amy. So
Yeah, you'll be around. So here's the thing. History and the midterms is a pretty simple one. I'm a big believer in the is it Mark Twain who said history doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes, right? Something like that. So when it comes to midterms, it's rhyming and repeating. I mean, it is very, very difficult if you are the party in the White House, and especially if you're the party that has the House, the Senate, and the White House, to do well in a midterm election. And since 2006, the House has flipped 3 times. When I first came to Washington, right after leaving Colby, the House flipped in 1994. That was the first time in 40 years that control of the House went from Democrat to Republican, right? Democrats had 40 straight years of control of the House. And and then it took another, another 10, 12 years before Democrats regained control in 2006. So in that period of time, just one flip this way, flip that way. Yeah. Since 2006, it's almost every 2 years that the House flips. What Democrats have going for them, so history, they have going for them the small margin. They only need to pick up 4 seats. The challenge is that, again, back in the days when I was covering the House, and it was the best job I ever had. I loved covering the House. You had a bunch of people who were unique. They were these folks who they sat in districts that did not correspond with their party. So there were Republicans sitting in districts that a Democratic president had won and vice versa. There were plenty of those folks. Today, there are 16 of them. That's it. There are only 16 members of Congress who sit in a district not won by the president of their party. If you go back into the 80s and 90s, it was 80 so people. The other thing that's really different from 2018 and that midterm, in 2018, there were something like 25 Republicans sitting in districts that Hillary Clinton had carried. So those were easy targets. Today there are 3.
3.
That's it.
Yep, 3.
And there are 13 Democrats who sit in Trump districts, including one right up the street with Jared Golden. So, you think about that the House has been decided in this last election by about 7,000 votes. That was the difference between between Republicans holding the majority and Democrats getting control. In 2022, it was equally small, something like 10,000 votes could have flipped control one way or the other. So, if a Jared Golden, let's say, perhaps runs for governor and that seat opens up, that's really tough for Democrats to hold. That's just as, there is the potential for redistricting once again to come into play in a state like Ohio. Which could put another 2 Democratic seats in peril. So even though the margins are so small, and even though history should be on the side of Democrats, when you get into this war of attrition where you're literally talking about 2 or 3 seats, and the other thing, Cal, that is just astronomical is the amount of money now in these races. The head of the NRSC, Senator Tim Scott, said the other day that his estimation is that the 2 seats they're defending, this one here with Susan Collins, and then in North Carolina with Tom Tillis, will likely be $1 billion.
Yeah, $1 billion.
$1 billion. And he's not, what was the main race? Was 300, 400 million for the Gideon Collins race?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
So, in Maine.
Sarah Gideon's still trying to spend that.
I know, right. In Maine, right? It's hard to spend that much money. It's one thing if you're in California, it's like the LA media market, it's gonna eat up $1 million a minute, but North Carolina, again, not that cheap, but still not to the expense of others. Right. The Senate is, here's the Republicans, even though they have to defend more seats, and they are defending a very vulnerable, on paper at least, seat here in Maine. Even if Democrats were to sweep Maine and North Carolina, the 2 most vulnerable seats for Republicans. Even if they held their most vulnerable seats, Michigan and Georgia, they'd still be 2 seats short.
Yeah.
And so the math just is not going to happen. So the House is the ball game. And then that gets into the question, too, of, well, what does a Democratic-led House and Trump look like? And are we going to get back to what we saw in the first term?
I want to go to audience questions, but I want to ask you one more thing. Where is the Democratic Party now? And what does the future look like for the Democrats?
Yeah, I am never one to be hard on the losing party after a presidential election, especially a presidential election where you lose everything. Because the thing is that what you learn from that last election is unlikely to help you as you look forward to the next one. The one that I really think about a lot is after 2012, here was Barack Obama winning a second term. The Democrats kept hold of the Senate that year as well. Republicans were despondent. They couldn't understand how they could lose twice. I don't think they were surprised about 2008, but to lose in 2012 with the economy as still deeply in the ditch as it was, they really thought they were going to win it. And so they took it upon themselves to put together this thing called the Opportunity and Growth Project, which everybody just called the autopsy. And their basic takeaway was, yeah, our party now is having problems reaching voters who aren't older and white, and we need to get younger people and people of color. Okay, not really a revelation, but for them it was that they admitted it, right? You got to admit what your problem is. And they said, and so the answer to that was you saw this Gang of 8 immigration bill in the Senate in 2013. Republicans working with Democrats passed comprehensive immigration reform. That was going to be their answer. And 4 years later, they nominate Donald Trump. So I just really think where Democrats are right now, fundamentally, their biggest challenge, it seems to me, is that they are the party defending the establishment at a time when people are unhappy with the establishment, and rightly so in many cases, and that they do not, for all of whatever you think about Donald Trump, the entrepreneurship that he brings into the process, I think is very attractive. It's new, it's different. Most people don't think about politics in the way that people like you and I think about politics. And, well, that can't, Democrats always have, the answer always seems to be, well, that can't work. You can't do that, right? They love the system and the process, and they've become just a little too technocratic. The answer to everything is, well, we'll do another government program. We'll have another tax incentive this. Rather than, think about the last really successful presidential candidate and Democrat was Barack Obama, who brought in this idea of being fresh and an outsider and somebody different who was going to think differently about this. And Democrats' kind of success in the last 8 years was built off of being not Trump. Now they've got to figure out what it means to be a Democrat. And their coalition is really strained because the most engaged of the coalition are people who at one time we would call Republicans, older, well-educated, well-off financially voters, who usually whiter voters. And the people who are drifting away from Democrats are the people that we thought were their core, which is younger voters especially younger voters of color, who's appealing to them. And having another conversation about norms and systems is not going to bring those people back.
All right, the floor is open, and we have microphones and people to deliver them, I think. So
Oh, good.
where,
Now I can see
where do we
everybody.
start?
Hi,
Hi.
can you hear me? I'm Nan Grossman, and I'm guessing both of you have read James Carville's article this week.
Yeah.
And he made 2 points, and I'm thinking maybe Amy disagrees with it first, which is the Democrats have to let Donald Trump shoot himself in the foot, and then people will come to their senses. But the second point, and I'm interested if you do disagree with him, the second point is the Democrats need a charismatic spokesman. Do either of you see somebody on the horizon who can, or several people who can storm the country and give the retooled message?
If
to
you'd
the
asked that
people?
question in 2004, I wouldn't have named Barack Obama. You know, people can appear. You've gotta think that there are a lot of Democratic politicians out there trying to calculate how they become that person and how, you know, and how they emerge. On the other hand, I think they're being very cautious about not wanting to be Trump's foil right now. And so there will be, Democrats are really good at getting in there and scrapping with each other, and I think we'll probably see plenty of that.
Yeah.
The governor of Kentucky, Beshear,
Yeah.
who is a Democratic governor of a red state, and quite articulate, young, maybe the sort of person that we will see emerge here, I don't know. But certainly the governor of Pennsylvania and the governor of California and former vice president, those people are doing their own set of trying to figure out how to go about this. I think.
Yeah, and I think another person to watch is Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, who's incredibly dynamic, has really an incredible life story.
Yeah, he does. Yep.
Now, he also has to be governor, right? Like he is, and like most of these states, they're having budget shortfalls. And so they're gonna have to, whether it's Josh Shapiro, Whitmer, Moore, they're all gonna have, you know, they're gonna have their work cut out for them right now. They've got to actually do their job at the same time that they're making the case. As for the Carville thing, I agree in this sense. The midterm elections are about the party in charge, not the opposition party, right? That's what people are voting on. So he's exactly right. This is how Democrats lost in 2010. What was it? It was a backlash to Obamacare. In 1994, it was a backlash to Bill Clinton, some of it on health care and a whole host of other things people were upset about. And of course, in 2018, it was the backlash to trying to repeal Obamacare. So if you are a Democrat, you know, this is, I think, their biggest challenge right now, just logistically. Republicans have to keep the government open, right? Like the government runs out of money in less than a month. And for years, there's this sort of wink and nod where Republicans have so many people on their side who will never vote for this continuing resolution that it only passes because Democrats don't say, we're going to be the responsible party, we're not going to let the government shut down. But now a lot of Democrats are like, what do we get for this?
Yeah.
So we're going to save your bacon? You want to govern? You want to do this by fiat? Go for it. You got 218 votes, great. You don't need me. And are Democrats going to let that happen? Which is going to have a real impact on people. Like, we can talk about it as this game of strategy, but things shut down. We already have, especially, and you know, I'm coming from Washington, where every single person in town has been impacted by the cuts to the government. And now you're going to have Democrats who are arguing against the sort of callousness in which these cuts have been enacted, saying, oh, it's okay, we can shut the government down for a while. Instead, I think what many Democrats, their theory of the case in talking to them, the theory of the case is this. Not only will Trump overreach because he can't help himself, but congressional Republicans, they want to pass this tax and immigration bill. And they want their tax cuts, and Trump also wants no tax on tips and all of the things that are really popular. You can only make it work if you find $800 billion in cuts. The only thing that has that much money is Medicaid, right? And that is politically really toxic vote for them to take. So in that sense, I would say that Carville's strategy of, let them go vote for that, let them own that on top of the other stuff, and we make that the campaign message for 26, but it can't be the 28 message. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Question for you. Going back through the guardrails you talked about, legislative, so on and so forth, there's one guardrail that's not political and not judicial, and that's the bond market.
Yeah.
Could you kind of...
I almost said that, actually.
Yeah.
No, seriously,
could
the
you
markets.
expound on that as a bond market, as a guardrail.
That was, speaking of James Carville, that was his famous statement in the 90s. He said, I used to think if I were to come back in another life, I wanted to be a famous, want to be like all-powerful person or like a famous athlete. He's like, no, when I come back, I want to come back as the bond market. Yeah. Because that is the most powerful influence on Earth. And, that's been the theory, long-held theory by many, and continues to be, especially on Wall Street. And of that, what we think of as still like the country club or the business Republican side of the party, who they don't really like Trump personally, but they think he's good for business. Their theory of the case is that he's going to push, he talks about these tariffs, he pushes all this stuff about, annexing Canada. If the markets freak out, he'll pull back. And, it was interesting watching him do the whole dance on the 25% tariff thing, right? We're putting these tariffs down tomorrow. Okay, 30 more days. Okay, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, now maybe on European goods, right? So it's this dance here. Now, he sees this as negotiating. What consumers, that's why I started off talking about the economic challenges that Republicans may be facing as soon as 26, is that what voters are hearing is like, wait, what? The tariff, should I buy? They're talking now about people who are making these big ticket item purchases, like, honey, we got to get that washing machine because who knows how much it's going to cost a year from now. So it's disrupting maybe in keeping foreign countries on their heels, but it's also making consumers really anxious. So you have the combination of consumer anxiety, which really spiked in February, which he may or may not, that's not, I don't know, as much of a driving force as if the markets start to freak out. Does he really pull back? And can you, right? What does that mean? It's like seeing Musk the other day, like, oh, sorry about that Ebola funding. We'll get that figured out. Like, you can't just put that back in the bottle, right? Once things start rolling, I don't know how much control you have. And the disruption that's happening right now, it's only been 5 weeks. I don't think we fully appreciate what it could look like. Now, it may not turn out to be the absolute disaster that Democrats argue that it will be, but the ripple effects, I think we'd have no idea.
Hi, John Patterson from Freeport. Given what you've described about the failure of Congress to increasingly do action on anything, what you didn't mention is the growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots, the kind of government of oligarchs that Biden talked about, the norm breaking, the norm smashing that's going on. Does American democracy survive another 25, 50 years?
Can can I have you weigh in on that first,
not
since
sure.
you have some perspective? Oh, about, you get to decide if American democracy can survive, and talk about also the role of, this billionaire class, which has an incredible influence on our politics.
Thank you. Some of us don't hear as well as we used to, let me say a couple things. First of all, I think we have had an inflation of language in discussions about what's going on now that is not serving us very well. We've been talking about fascism and coups and constitutional crises and all of those things. If you like those words, go ahead and use them, but I don't think they're very helpful in analyzing what we're dealing with right now. We've got some specific things happening. They create specific problems for some people, and we need to come up with solutions and responses for those sorts of things. It's important to keep the context in mind, too. All of the democracies are struggling with what we're struggling with. There are three great issues, I think we all have a different list probably, but here's mine, of challenges to democracies right now. One is mass migration. There are more people moving around the world than ever before in human history. Let me just give you one piece of data I ran into the other day. 100 years ago, the population of Africa was 1/3 the size of the population of all the countries in Europe. Today, 100 years later, the African population is twice as large as the European population, and the African population is supposed to double in the next 30 years. Now, most of those people in Africa live in failed states or under incompetent governments, if they have a government at all. So what are they to do? Go somewhere. And they go to Europe, and they go to the United States, and so the wealthier countries are being subject to this influx of people from poorer countries, and they simply don't have a mechanism to deal with that. There are really no democracies that have a rational immigration program.
Yep.
And this is one of the great challenges they're all facing. Second great challenge is public debt. All of the democracies have borrowed more money than they can now really afford to pay back, and we're certainly the leaders in that. The debt, the public debt in the United States right now is $36 trillion. Servicing that debt every year, that is paying interest to the people who lent the money to the government, costs more than $1.1 billion in this year's budget. That's more money than we spend on national defense, it's more money than we spend on Medicare, and it's the fastest growing portion of the budget. So how do we get that under control? That's a very serious problem we're all going to confront. Then there's the third problem, global climate change, which the current administration seems to have dismissed. But we all know it's real. We all know that it's an international problem and it's going to require international solutions, and the data are telling us it's getting worse more rapidly than we had imagined. So those are the threats to democracy in this country, and I think those are the threats to democracy everywhere, and coming up with solutions to those is going to be a heck of a challenge for all of us.
So do we make it?
The all-purpose answer today is we'll see.
That's very reassuring.
Over here, do we have a microphone? Yeah, coming. Yep.
Joanne Berg from Cumberland. And being egocentric, my main concern is education. I think democracy will be affected by the lack of or the reduced quality of education. And I just read the other day in the newspaper that Trump has appointed a group to check out the Cumberland North Yarmouth school system. And that's where my grandchildren go to school. And I don't want them to see a bunch of, and a group of individuals coming into their school, checking things out and having to explain that to them. So what would you do?
Yeah, what do you do with a system, I have an 18-year-old, and I have said that he's been like the skeleton key for me for so many things, but especially this election and this moment. And seeing how and where he gets information. Now, and any of you who have children this age know or around young people, you know this. They are not getting information the way we did. They just simply are not. They also have an attention span, and all of us are suffering from this. I know I am because of these devices that are in our hands, but even shorter than it's been. Getting kids to even watch a full movie is difficult because they want to watch the short version of it, right? The YouTube highlights. So this is all and it's also all they know. They don't have a reference point for anything else. So this is how they're getting their information. He is mostly getting his through stuff he's watching on YouTube. Now some of it is pretty remarkable. He's learning things that I didn't know at his age, but it's a lot of crap too. And he doesn't know how to discern what's true and what's not. And so when we think about what it means to have an educated populace, I think the challenge going forward is how do we have to first of all get out of this idea that we're gonna go back to the way it was. Like, people are gonna get their news from TikTok, that's just it. They're not gonna go to the New York Times. Okay, like let's accept that, and now what do we do with that? Now how do the schools respond to that? The fact that the schools finally are forcing kids to put up their phones, like, is step one. That I could not have applauded louder for, and my son continues to violate it, and I get calls of like, he didn't turn in his phone today. But I think that's step number one, is getting that done. And then the second is, I've tried to look at the more optimistic way of this, is part of the challenge we have right now in thinking about this stuff is that, at least for me, I can't do it because I keep thinking in my 20th century brain of how it should work. And I keep falling back on the old models, and that our kids coming up, they're the ones who understand how they are getting information, how they are learning, how they want to get information, and they're gonna have to help shape that for us. So we're in this uncomfortable moment where there are just the people who are in power right now and the people who are disseminating information are all from the 20th century. The 21st century folks are creating their own ecosystems, and then they are gonna be the ones that build these systems. And I do think it is gonna look a lot different, but we need people, especially whether they're in education and other places, parents really getting engaged in understanding this ecosystem. And it is more than what one school can do. Any school, any teacher can do. So it's, that is, it is it's not to the category of what Cal just said about all of the challenges to democracy with global warming, et cetera, but our information flow and ecosystem is a fundamental issue, and it's affecting our culture, it's affecting our politics, it's affecting the way that our communities evolve. The fact that, again, you see, we have now in this Gen Z, the gender gap in terms of how boys and girls, men and women in that Gen Z era are farther apart on political and social issues than any generation. And it's driven, I think, mostly by the things that we hold in our hand. So this goes beyond just our politics. This is a really big challenge for our society.
I want to go back to the substance of that issue. I've spent most of my life looking for teachable moments, and we're having one right now on this question of transgender kids playing high school sports. Another former student of mine who is a columnist for the Boston Globe named Scott Lehigh wrote a piece today that said, isn't it funny that when it comes to abortion, Trump says leave it to the states, but on high school sports, it's my way or the highway? Well, why is that? Because this is a right now, this not very ripe political issue is just wonderful for Republicans. And there were Republican candidates for Congress in the last election who had campaign signs that said save girls sports. And it worked for them. We know that the public opinion polls are telling us very overwhelmingly that the American people do not want transgender girls playing girls sports, people who were born as boys. It's a complicated issue, all right? That part of it may not be so complicated. One of my colleagues at Colby for many years was a woman named Jennifer Finney Boylan. But I knew Jenny when she was Jim Boylan. And for more than a decade, Jim and I played in a weekly poker game, and we did guy stuff. And then I came back, I went to England for a year, and I came back, and Jim was Jenny. And if you've read any of her books, if you've had the opportunity that I've had to have conversations with her, you know that this is not a simple thing to go through in life. I have a nephew who used to be my niece, and we have watched her deal with the challenges in her life. And to turn this group of people wrestling with very, very difficult things in their own life into somebody we're going to demonize for political reasons is worrisome, I think, in lots of ways. And while I have two granddaughters who are very good athletes, you know, and when I talk to them, they're both in high school, one's in junior high school, when I talk to them about this issue, well, my older granddaughter says, I can handle anybody, don't worry about that. But I think, you know, I think they see the complexity of it because they have friends who are transgender. And I hope that cooler heads can prevail here, and we, people in the state of Maine, people in other states, can be allowed to wrestle with these issues on our own and have some rational resolution to them, not have somebody in Washington tell us what we've got to do about all of this.
Well said. Well said.
I've got one over here.
I think there's.
Hi, Susan Thornton from Lisbon. I really appreciate what you said about the frustrations with the system. And I really want to know, you've been in Washington now for quite a while.
Yes.
If you had one magic bullet,
Yes.
you could wave your wand and do one thing in Washington, what would it be?
Oh, one thing in Washington.
Yeah, to fix the politics, what would it be?
You know, I don't want you to think this is a cop-out, but I do think that politics is downstream from culture, right? And so we talk about, I understand gerrymandering, and it does play definitely a role in the ways in which it has like calcified our system in the worst way, calcified our partisanship. And at the same time, I look at the number of counties, so these are not gerrymandered, that are now overwhelmingly red or overwhelmingly blue. And that's not people drawing lines to create these political maps for themselves. That's people sorting themselves into this. Yep. And that my colleague, David Wasserman, has been doing work looking at different communities using through the lens of establishments that are primarily red state establishments and primarily blue states. And this started back in 2000. I was having a conversation with somebody who was on the Gore campaign who said, oh my God, we got killed everywhere that didn't have a Starbucks in it. And back when Starbucks was only in cities, right? We can't, if there are young people here, that's how it used to be. Starbucks was not ubiquitous. So anyway, we've come up with many iterations. His is now that looking through voting patterns based on Cracker Barrels and Whole Foods. Which my favorite story of that is he was presenting this at a place that was in a blue area, and a woman raised her hand and said, "I'm sorry, did you say crate and barrel? I do not know. what is a Cracker Barrel?" And he's like, "Exactly." And what he found, if you go back to the early 90s, yeah, Republicans were doing better in the counties that now have a Cracker Barrel.
Right.
But by like 10 points or so, it's now a 55, 60 point gap between Cracker Barrel and Whole Foods. And unfortunately now, because both of those are going into different areas, and he's now had to refine it even more into, blue is now represented by Lululemon, and red is Tractor Supply.
Tractors.
But anyway, the point being this, that it wasn't that long ago, so it's right after, 1992, here was Bill Clinton losing by a smaller margin in those Cracker Barrels. Now, Democrats are losing by this big of a margin. And in the Whole Foods districts, which were willing to support a Republican, they now will not. So much of this comes down to, the problem is us, rather than the problem is them. We send these people to Washington. We are responsible for what we're asking of them. And the dysfunction happens in large part because there's not a consequence for it, right? So what? We didn't get anything done. So what? I'm spewing crazy conspiracy theories. What do you do about it? And if there's one thing I guess I could change, it is to get people's engagement in politics beyond just November. Now, maybe it's that we have a national primary day. I know the states would hate this because they love having the ability to design and when and how they hold their primary contests. But there's so low engagement that they become really just proxies for the extreme. And in so many of these states, you can, if you have a crowded primary and there's a 5% turnout and you win with 32% of the vote, you literally were elected by like 12,000 people. Out of the 1 million people in your district, 12,000 people chose who your representative was. And when you get to that point, you're like, oh, right. So even if you have a red district or a blue district, the caliber of person is part of it. It's not just the jersey of that person that matters. And so getting, I don't know whether it's getting people to engage more, whether it's having a national primary day, something that says to people, okay, November's important, I want you to think about that, but I really want you to turn out in June. Because what you're doing now is setting the member of Congress who may be here for the rest of their life.
I get to say my magic bullet?
Yeah.
Campaign finance. There are no rules anymore.
Yeah.
The Federal Elections Commission, I don't know if they've even got a
quorum.
A quorum.
I think they ever...
It doesn't matter. Since Citizens United, it was certainly going in that direction before Citizens United, but since then all restraints are gone. So we have very wealthy people who have become kingmakers in a sense, and are proud of it and not shy about it, and that's driving a lot of good people out of politics, I think, because they don't think they can play that game.
And and what's even more pernicious about it is it's not just that they want the red team or the blue team to win, it's the ideological stripe of that person, right?
Yeah.
So at least when the money was coming through the campaign committees, they would say, yeah, look, we want to make sure that in this swing area, we have someone who has the right profile. Maybe they don't agree with all the positions of the Democratic or the Republican Party, but they're the best candidate for that seat. That's what we want, rather than, oh, no, we need a pure candidate who's never going to compromise, that's the one that I'm bankrolling.
Got hand back. Oh, you got one there. Okay.
Hi,
Oh, I know you.
Cal Mackenzie, Amy Walter.
Lisa
I'm a
Halley.
former Cal Mackenzie student myself. Yay, he's the best. I'm kind of left, shaking and quaking like a tree. I'm afraid for our country right now, and I think there's a lot. I'm not the only one. There's an undercurrent of powerlessness and fear that's gripping us, and a feeling of what can we do about this? For all the reasons you said. I mean, I've listened to you talk forever about how you said. I remember when the first Trump administration happened, and you and I had lunch, and you said, "Don't worry, there's an institution here. He can't break the whole thing." And I said, "Okay, all right. If Cal says it's going to be okay." So I came tonight thinking Cal's going to say it's going to be okay, and I'm really not hearing that. Yep, sorry. So what I guess I'm asking is, what can we do as individuals besides read and get educated?
That's the right question, I think. A lot of my friends say, I don't watch the news anymore. I can't stand to watch the news. There's never been a time when it was more important for citizens, responsible citizens, to pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
And if you don't and can't act on that, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution here. So I think that's step one, is to pay attention and learn everything you can. You can go to demonstrations. Our history doesn't tell us that demonstrations by themselves ever changed public policy, but demonstrations can be part of building support for an effort that affects public policy. Those of us who were old enough to have lived through the Vietnam era know there were an awful lot of demonstrations, and the war kept going, and the war kept going, and the war kept going. But eventually we pulled out of that war. So that's part of it. I think talking to your friends, going to whatever groups you're a member of, going to the bowling league and talking to your buddies at the bowling league, and getting them to understand how important it is to be part of this. I think that's important as well. Write to your newspaper. Get whatever social media you use to communicate with other people. Say what you think in there. And then call your member of Congress. And I say call. You can send an email and it will go off into a file that you'll get a response back from some programmed thing. But if you call, and you say your name and where you live and what zip code you live in, and ask to talk to the staff member on the committee who is on the member staff who is dealing with the issues you care about, and have prepared a concise statement of what you would like to say, and ask what you should expect to get as a response from the member of Congress. You're going to get a much better reaction, and you're going to weigh much more heavily on that member's thinking than if you put some words on a computer screen that they can push off to the side very easily. That is my sense of what it means to be a responsible citizen at a time like this.
Hi, Ellen Crow. I would like to submit a silver bullet for your consideration, Amy. I was hoping you were going to say ranked choice voting.
Oh.
And I'd like to hear you talk about what that might do if it was at the Washington level.
Yeah, I think it is a great concept for those of you who don't know it. Well, you have it here, so I don't need to explain it to you. But and you're seeing it pop up in a number of other municipalities, not so much in other states. And in fact, in Nevada, it lost, actually, in every place it was on the ballot in this last election, ranked choice voting lost. And I haven't seen like a perfect explanation for why that happened. My guess is, one, the amount of money that opponents put up against it was obviously the factor. But what is it about ranked choice voting that they were able to get people to be concerned about? Is it that it's too complicated, that it is, going to produce the wrong kinds of candidates? But I think you're just introducing to the public something new, and people don't like to do new stuff, right? We've been doing it this way forever and ever and ever. Just fix what we have. Don't try to create a whole new crazy system where I gotta put like this person's 1 and this person's 3, and it takes on. And the other challenge in an era of, look, we spent how many months on the whole was the election stolen, and cyber ninjas going to Arizona and hand counting ballots and all of that. I think you at a time where people are as nervous about that integrity question, something where, okay, so you're going to have to get these votes, and then you're going to have to count them and then reallocate them, and then how long is that going to take, and how will I know if this is really working, and how open is it? But I like the concept of it, which is to say that it allows people the opportunity to, or actually, it's theoretically going to bring the most moderate voices into the system, right? Because you have to build a coalition of 50%. You can't just win with a very narrow margin of your true believers. I will say, even if you don't go that far, even just having a primary ballot with all the candidates on the same ballot, a top 2 system, I can't remember what the number of Republicans was total who voted to impeach Trump. There are only 2 of them left. Both of them are from states that have top 2 primaries, and in Washington and California. And what that means is that, again, in a regular primary, those folks wouldn't have survived because the right would have come in and knocked them out. Now, the top 2 vote getters move on, whether those top 2 are Republicans, those top 2 are Democrats, or usually it's a Democrat and a Republican. So that system alone does have some potential for being sort of a moderating influence, or an opportunity for incumbents to buck their own party, whether it's the party in the White House or their party on a certain issue, knowing that they're somewhat insulated from attacks from their left or right flank.
I hate to do this, but nobody has mentioned the M word in this whole discussion between the 2 of you, and that's Musk.
Oh,
and
I was like, gosh.
I'm just,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel as if he hadn't had Musk, could he be doing what he's doing? And if Musk disappears, which I think is possible because of a rift or something, will Trump be able to sustain the kind of chaos that he's created?
Well, I think
I'm not touching, that's my wife.
that's a total setup for me. I got totally set up. Right, I have 1 minute. So here's the thing about Musk. He is also a great heat shield for Donald Trump. And so, look, Musk is already less popular than, and more polarizing than Trump. Musk's whole motto, and he's getting encouragement right now from Donald Trump, is to get in there. You can break, what is that? Move fast and break stuff, right? It's the Silicon Valley ethos, and he embodies it perfectly, and we're gonna make mistakes, and we'll try to fix the ones, but maybe we can't totally fix them, but that's okay because the greater good is better, right? So let's say we do have incidents where, as we've already seen, we fired the people who know like the nuclear codes, right? It wasn't the nuclear codes, but it was people who like know the nuclear stuff. We got to get them back, right?
Yeah.
Now 3 months from now, there's a meltdown at a nuclear plant or whatever it is. But it's usually never that clean and clear, right? That we're going to see all these layoffs, and then tomorrow some terrible thing's going to happen, and voters are going to go, oh, that's right, because Musk was there, and he did the thing, and that thing meant that this thing happened here. So really what he becomes is the face of the disruption, that if it gets too disrupty and too uncomfortable for voters or there's a backlash, you're right. You can see Trump being like, oh, man, Elon, phew. It's been fun, but you got to go, right? Kind of went too far there. And how long does he want to do this before he gets kind of bored with it, right? Like, that is also true. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy lasted 20 minutes, and now he's running for governor in Ohio. So you could also see something else sort of distract him there. But as Cal was pointing out, I mean, the blueprint had already been written. So he's not like, he didn't come up full cloth with how this actually works, but it's, he's an interesting Rorschach test, because I've been listening in to these focus groups of especially Biden to Trump voters about what they think about Elon Musk, right? And I think at first, this idea that he was the Silicon Valley guy was appealing, right? These guys know how to do stuff. These guys are disruptors. That's awesome. And they're out-of-the-box thinkers, and they're gonna just shake up this the system in a way that no traditional politician could do. Now, how are they gonna feel about that a year from now? We don't know. So in some ways, he is actually a very good placeholder for Trump on this, because he does represent that model that Trump wants to bring into government, but into the way he sees the whole world, which is, you need people who aren't from here, who don't think like the rest of these nabbering whatever they were. So, but yes, he will continue to be just like anybody who gets involved in politics now and is out front. He will have the same polarizingness. So you're going to see a whole bunch of people. We've already started to see this thing of, you know, people in blue states trading in their Teslas, and people in red states buying Tesla Cybertrucks. And welcome to our system.
And Sally and I did not coordinate this, but for the last question of the evening, if Donald J. Trump passed away tonight, what would happen to the MAGA movement? What will happen to, I'll call it more than the MAGA movement, the current Republican oligarch movement that is controlling the country?
What do you think?
It's hard to imagine the MAGA movement without Donald Trump. But there is a core group of more than 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump. They aren't going to disappear. The question is, could somebody recapture the leadership of that group? And if so, who would that be? And it's not readily apparent to me who that would be. It would be a fight. And
Yeah.
we would, what did I say? We'll see.
I like that answer. I'm just going to say that now. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's interesting that Trump, in many ways, is a reaction to the frustration of voters about the last, let's call it, 25 years of politics that really became dynastic, right? You'd had the Bushes and the Clintons, right? And here comes Trump out of nowhere, shaking this all up. He's not part of this. But his son wants to be part of this. He'll be part of this fight. His daughter-in-law was going to run for governor or Senate in Florida, or appointed in the Senate in Florida.
But better, she has a Fox show now.
Now she has, right. That's
real
the pathway directly there, which is the case. So will this be a MAGA movement run by the people who were the early adherents, or maybe even the late bloomers like J.D. Vance, or will it be more dynastic, that you will have the Trump brand is what keeps the MAGA movement going. But nobody can, and we'll just end with this, but no president can convey their coalition onto the next candidate. There was no Obama coalition without Obama.
Yep.
There will not be a Trump coalition without Trump. Whoever comes in is going to have to create, they'll have the base built by Trump, but then they've got to create that coalition on their own.
Amazing evening, Amy Walter,
Thank you.
Calvin Mackenzie.